Before there were names, before there were memories, there was only the earth vast, breathing and endless beneath a golden young sun. The continents were still stretching, drifting, like ancient sleepers turning in their dreams. Volcanoes whispered smoke into the sky. Rivers uncoiled through valleys of green and gold. The wind moved across the savannas, slow, warm, eternal, carrying the scent of rain, of dust, of life, just beginning to stir. It was a time before stories, before language, before the first thought that called itself human. Yet even then, in the cradle of Africa, something was waiting. A spark, small and steady, hidden within the long heartbeat of the earth. 2 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens, before even Neanderthals, there walked another kind of being. Upright, resilient, patient beyond measure. The greatest survivor the planet has ever known. Homo erectus. They would live longer than any human species before or after them, enduring for nearly 2 million years. Through droughts and ice, through fire and flood, they would cross continents without maps, master the flame without words, and shape the rhythm of all who came after. Imagine the world they knew. No cities, no sound of tools or wheels. Only the quiet hum of existence, insects droning in the heat. The soft steps of herds across dry plains, the far call of birds rising over lakes the size of small seas. It was a world both dangerous and serene, ruled by rhythm, not by reason. Days were measured not by clocks, but by the warmth of the sun, the chill of nightfall, the pull of hunger, and the whisper of the wind. In this silence, something extraordinary unfolded. A creature stood taller than its ancestors. Its hands, once meant for climbing, could now grasp shape and strike. Its eyes, shaded beneath a sloping brow, scanned the horizon not only for prey but for possibility. It was not yet us, but it was something close, a bridge between what was and what would be. The earth itself seemed to cradle their journey. In eastern Africa, near the shimmering lakes of the Rift Valley, the first fires of consciousness flickered. They lived in a land of vast grasslands and scattered acacia trees, where the ground cracked beneath the sun and storms rolled in from the horizon with a voice like thunder. The air carried the scent of wildflowers, of dust of rain that came and went like breath. Here the first Homo erectus learned to walk far farther than any creature of its kind. Their steps would one day echo beyond Africa into the forests of Asia, the coasts of Indonesia, the plains of Europe. They would watch glaciers move and retreat. They would see rivers carve the earth anew. For age after age, they endured, quiet, clever, and utterly bound to the pulse of the land. And perhaps most miraculous of all, they learned to tend the flame. Fire was no longer a mystery. It was a companion, a tool, a guardian. It glowed at the center of their gatherings, warding off the shadows, turning cold meat warm and safe, lighting faces that began to wonder. Around those fires, the night changed forever. For the first time, the dark was no longer absolute. Imagine sitting there with them under a canopy of stars, unbroken by cities or smoke. The Milky Way spills across the sky like powdered light. The air hums softly with crickets and the faint hiss of embers. A group huddles close, quiet, drowsy, warm. Somewhere in that circle, a mother hums a low rhythm, perhaps without words, only breath, the first lullaby of humankind. This is where our story begins, not in the noise of progress, but in the hush before history, when the first among us began to see beyond survival, when curiosity first met endurance, when a species stood in balance with the world not above it. Homo erectus did not build monuments or kingdoms. They did not leave behind songs or scrolls. Their memory is written instead in bones and ashes, in footprints pressed into ancient mud, in tools chipped from stone and scattered across continents. But if you listen closely, if you let your mind grow still, you can almost hear them. The rustle of movement in the grass, the rhythm of distant footsteps, a voice carried by time soft as dust. We were here, and they were. For nearly 2 million years longer than any species of human has ever endured. They watched ages rise and fall, climates change, oceans withdraw and return. They saw the first sparks of ingenuity, the hand axe, the hearth, the hunt. Every gesture, every fire lit, every step taken across a strange land became a thread in the great tapestry that would one day become us. So tonight, as you lie still and breathe with the quiet rhythm of the dark, let your thoughts drift back far beyond memory, beyond language, to the dawn of endurance. To the age of Homo Erectus, they are not gone. They live in the architecture of your bones, in the endurance of your heart, in the long story of survival written into every cell of your body. They are the echo beneath your skin. And as we journey into their world, let the ancient wind become your companion. Let the flicker of firelight behind your eyes guide you deeper into stillness. There is no hurry. Time moves differently here, slower, wider, more forgiving. For this is the story of the greatest survivor in human history. And it begins not with a shout, but with a whisper carried through the ages. Before there were cities, before there was fire, there was wind and dust, and a creature learning slowly how to endure. Long before the idea of history existed, the story of Homo erectus began not in a single moment, but as a long unfolding, a slow awakening within the vast rhythm of the earth. It began in Africa, the eternal cradle of life. The land was older than imagination. Its skies burned wide and open, a blue so deep it seemed to reach eternity. Below, endless plains rippled beneath the sun. Herds of antelope grazed where the grass was high. Lions crouched low in the shade. The air shimmered with heat, with dust, with the faint perfume of dry leaves carried by wind. In this place where rivers carved silver lines across the red earth, something was changing. A new kind of being was emerging from the long story of the apes, from ancestors who still clung to trees when the ground below grew harsh. For millions of years, their lineage had endured, small, clever, cautious, watching the land shift from forest to open savanna. And as the forest retreated, the old ways no longer worked. Climbing was safety, but the trees grew scarce. Gathering was comfort, but the fruits grew fewer. To survive, they had to step down, stand tall, and face the horizon. That first step, that quiet moment when instinct became intention, was the beginning of something vast. From Australopithecus came change. Bones grew longer, stronger, built for distance. Hands evolved not merely to hold, but to craft. The jaw shrank. The brain swelled, the gaze lifted. And somewhere between one sunrise and another, between one life and the next, the first of the upright humans took their place on the land, Homo erectus. They stood on 2 feet, their shadows stretching long and thin across the plains. Their stride was sure, balanced, steady. They could travel for hours, following the scent of rain, the trail of herds, the promise of water, glinting on the horizon. The world opened to them, vast and shimmering, and they began to move through it not as wanderers by accident, but as explorers by nature. They were taller than their ancestors, their bodies lean and strong, built for endurance. Their skulls were thick, their brows heavy, their faces long and broad. Within their chests, a new rhythm, lungs built for distance, for persistence. And within their minds, a quiet fire of awareness that had begun to glow. It is easy now to forget the immensity of that transformation. To stand upright is not merely to walk differently, it is to see differently, to look beyond the ground and into the horizon, to recognize direction, distance, purpose. Every sunrise brought new questions, though they had no words for them. Where did the herds go when the rains ended? What lay beyond the mountains that burned red in evening light? Why did lightning call fire from the sky? They did not answer these questions. They lived them. From the shores of Lake Turkana to the caves of Olduvai, they moved in small bands, families, bound by need, by warmth, by shared survival. They followed the rivers, hunted together, rested in the shade of cliffs when the midday sun burned too fierce. They learned to use stone not only to cut but to shape, to make edges sharp enough to slice hide, to carve bone, to scrape meat from the bone of an antelope brought down after a long chase. Those stones, chipped, flaked, refined, were the first tools that outlived their makers. They remain today half buried in ancient soil, a message from the deep past, written not in letters but in form. A single hand axe could tell the story of patience, of trial and error, of intention, repeated thousands of times over generations, until skill became instinct. And with every spark of innovation, Homo erectus stepped a little closer to mastery, not over others, but over time itself. Seasons changed, climates shifted, the earth grew colder then warm again. Herds migrated, lakes vanished, forests turned to grasslands, and grasslands to desert. And still, they walked. No other creature of their age traveled so far. They crossed mountains and deserts, rivers and valleys, their footprints a quiet map of migration that stretched farther than any before. From Africa, they moved north, following the promise of water and life. Through corridors of green that reached into the Middle East, across lands that would one day become Arabia. They saw new skies, new constellations. They learned the shape of the seasons in lands that were not their own. By 800,000 years after their beginning, they had reached the far edges of Asia, Java, China, perhaps even the islands of Indonesia. In time, they would be found everywhere, from the shores of the Black Sea to the humid forests of Southeast Asia. Imagine what it was to walk across such a world. No maps, no paths, only instinct, memory, and the rhythm of the sun. Every sunrise, a new beginning. Every sunset, a quiet rest beneath unfamiliar stars. And through it all, the endurance of fire. At first it was borrowed, taken from lightning or from the burning edge of trees struck in storms, but in time they learned to keep it alive. They carried embers wrapped in bark or bone. They fed it with dry grass, with twigs, with breath. They gathered around it at dusk, the red glow flickering in their dark eyes. Around fire they began to gather as something more than animals. They began to share warmth, protection time. The nights grew longer, but the fear of darkness began to fade. For hundreds of thousands of years, that light, simple, small, steady, became the center of their world. They would sleep beside it, dream beside it, wake to its ashes, and rebuild. Fire changed them not through words or ideas, but through silence, through the way it allowed them to see one another, to rest, to remember faces by its glow. It was here in the quiet glow of that firelight that the first sense of continuity was born. Not thought as we know it, but a feeling that tomorrow could resemble today. That warmth could be made to last, and from that feeling grew the earliest root of what we now call humanity. Across ages and landscapes, Homo erectus continued to thrive. They were not the largest predators nor the strongest, but they were the most enduring, patient, steady, unyielding. They survived droughts that emptied the rivers, cold seasons that withered the grass, and predators that outmatched them in speed or strength. They survived because they adapted, because their minds were learning not in sudden leaps, but in quiet persistence. They learned to read the wind, to know the moods of animals, to find water by the tilt of the land and the flight of birds. Their knowledge was not spoken, but passed through gesture, through imitation, through the silent rhythm of daily life. Every generation carried the wisdom of those before, how to sharpen stone, where to find shelter, when to move, when to stay. This was their language, movement, memory, and continuity. And though they did not know it, they were shaping the future of every being that would one day call itself human. When scientists found their remains, scattered bones turned to stone skulls, thick and ancient, they saw not just individuals, but a lineage of survivors. They found traces of ash in ancient caves, stones chipped by steady hands, footprints pressed into hardened mud. And in those silent marks, they recognized the first clear signs of what it means to endure. Homo erectus was not the beginning of intelligence, but the beginning of stability of mind that learns through time, not just instinct. They did not conquer the world. They coexisted with it. They learned its seasons, its moods, its silence, and through that patience they lasted longer than any of their kin. As we look back now across the vast distance of time, their story feels both distant and familiar. They lived as we dream of living close to the earth, carried by the rhythm of the seasons, bound to the warmth of the fire and the sky above. Their lives were short by our measure, but their species endured for nearly 2 million years. Generation upon generation, they walked, they hunted, they rested, they watched the world turn until their story became the deep foundation upon which ours stands. So when we speak of Homo erectus, we speak not only of what was, but of what remains. The straightness of our spine, the patience in our walk, the endurance of our kind. They are our beginning, the quiet architects of our humanity. The bridge between the beasts that dreamed in trees and the thinkers that gaze at the stars. And as the long winds of time carry us forward, their echo continues, steady, quiet, eternal, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Day after day, the sun rose over the vast plains of the ancient earth, and Homo erectus walked beneath it, quiet, tireless, enduring. They were wanderers, not by choice, but by nature. Every horizon was a promise, every river a lifeline. The world around them was both home and challenge, always changing, always alive. Their lives moved in rhythm with the seasons. When the rains came, the grasslands turned to green seas of life, herds of antelope and zebra, filling the horizon, their movement like ripples in the land itself. When the dry season returned, the rivers shrank, the air shimmered with heat, and the herds drifted toward distant waterholes. Homo erectus followed, carrying with them nothing but memory, the shape of a valley, the direction of a wind, the knowledge of a trail that would lead eventually to survival. They lived in small groups, perhaps 20, maybe 30 at most. Families bound by necessity and quiet familiarity. There were no leaders, no words, no laws, only a shared pulse of existence. Each one knew their place, not through command, but through rhythm, who hunted, who guarded the fire, who carried the young. Their tools were simple but elegant in their purpose. Hand axes shaped from volcanic stone, each one the result of countless generations of refinement. A sharp edge made from patience and skill. The hand axe was the companion of every life used to cut meat, to carve wood, to dig roots from dry soil. In its simplicity lay a perfection, a design that would endure almost unchanged for over 1 million years. Every chipped stone held a quiet story. The strike of a hammerstone against flint, the sound of progress echoing across time. It was not art, not yet, but it was intention, the act of seeing what could be and shaping it into being. With those tools, they shaped the world around them in small but lasting ways. They built shelters from branches and leaves, settled near rivers where fish swam in the shallows, and learned to use stone to open the marrow of bones, the rich prize hidden within the remains of a hunt. They were hunters, but not reckless ones. They understood the patience of pursuit, the art of tracking, of watching the dust rise in the distance, of waiting for the right moment to move. They chased with endurance, not speed. They could follow a wounded antelope for hours beneath the burning sun, their steady pace outlasting the strength of their prey. This was persistence, hunting the long pursuit that no other creature could match. And when the animal finally fell, exhausted, trembling, the group approached in quiet respect. The hunt was not violence, but balance. To eat was to live. To live was to belong to the great turning of the earth. They ate meat roots, fruits, insects. They cracked nuts with stones dug for tubers, waded through shallow lakes for fish and shell. Their diet shifted with the land, as flexible as the weather that ruled them. Their brains, already growing larger than any before them, were fed by this richness, nourished by protein, by fat, by fire-cooked meals that freed more energy for thought. Around the fire, life changed. Fire softened what was hard preserved. What would rot kept away the beasts that roamed in the dark. But more than that, fire created a circle, a center for community. When the sun fell and the air cooled, they gathered close. The glow of embers painted their faces in gold and shadow. Children slept in the warmth, pressed against their mother's skin. The night, once the realm of fear, became a time of rest, of quiet, of connection. No words were spoken, not as we know them, but there was understanding. Gesture, glance, the music of the body. A raised hand could warn of danger. A soft murmur could soothe a crying child. A glance could share meaning deeper than sound. Perhaps this was the beginning of language, not speech, but rhythm. The rhythm of life repeated and shared, passed on from one generation to the next. In their throats, in their breath, the roots of voice were forming. Their faces, their eyes, their gestures, all carried intention. And slowly through ages beyond counting, communication began to take shape. Imagine them by the fire long ago, a mother shaping a stone, her child watching closely, a man pointing toward the rising smoke of distant lightning, a woman humming softly while preparing food. These moments, so small, so ordinary, were the quiet seeds of everything that would follow. From Africa, they continued to wander. Each step took them farther from their origins, yet always toward survival. The earth itself was changing, mountains rose, ice spread, oceans withdrew. But Homo erectus endured. In the highlands of Georgia, in the caves of China, in the islands of Indonesia, their remains still lie silent witnesses to the journeys of their kind. Every discovery tells the same truth: they adapted to everything. They survived where others perished. They lived through heat and cold, through drought and flood, through the rise and fall of worlds. No species has ever shown such endurance. They built nothing that lasted, yet their legacy endures in us, in the patience of our minds, in the curiosity that drives us beyond the known. To live as they did was to belong wholly to the earth. There was no separation between body and landscape, between being and becoming. The horizon was not a boundary, but an invitation. Their lives were simple yet profound in their intimacy with time. Each day began with light, ended with dark, and between those two edges stretched the quiet struggle of survival. the same rhythm that beats still in the heart of every living creature. The seasons turned like pages in an endless book. They watched the migrations of birds and beasts, the swelling of rivers, the return of rain. They understood without speaking the cycles of the world. And though they did not leave behind art, there was beauty in what they did create. A stone perfectly balanced between edge and curve. A shelter built from branches bent just so. A handprint pressed into soft earth, fading slowly under the sun. Their intelligence was not abstract, but embodied, learned through touch, through experience, through failure, repeated until mastery was born. They were thinkers of movement, philosophers of endurance. Their thoughts, though unspoken, were written in their actions in every step that carried them through an uncertain world. And perhaps sometimes when the night was still and the stars burned cold above the plains, they looked up and wondered, not in words, but in feeling. They might have felt awe, the same quiet wonder we feel now when we gaze at the endless dark sky. For beneath those same constellations, their hearts beat as ours do. The same rhythm, the same fragile, miraculous life. Their evolution was not just physical, but spiritual in its patience. Each generation added a small note to the long symphony of survival, stronger hands, keener eyes, a steadier mind. And as their brains grew, so too did the potential for imagination. They began to dream. Dreams not of cities or gods, but of the hunt of water, of fire, of faces they had lost. Dreams born from memory and longing, the first sparks of the inner world that would one day define humanity. Through them, we learned endurance. Through them, we learned curiosity. Through them, we learned to look forward, to seek what lies beyond the hill, beyond the horizon, beyond the self. Homo erectus was not a fleeting spark in the story of life, they were a steady flame. Where others flared and vanished, they burned low and long, their light carrying across 2 million years. Every human who came after Neanderthal, Denisovan, and modern Homo sapiens carries that flame still. It lives in our hands, in our stride, in our hunger for meaning. They were the great survivors, not because they conquered, but because they belonged. Because they moved with the earth, not against it. Because they listened to its rhythm, learned its seasons, trusted its balance. Their story is not just ancient, it is eternal. For even now, when we walk through quiet places, along a windswept plain beside a river at dusk, some part of us remembers. Our bodies remember the sun, on bare skin the scent of rain, on dust the calm that comes from knowing the world as home. And perhaps in that remembrance there is peace, the same peace that guided them through endless generations, steady, grounded, alive. The age of Homo erectus was long, so long that whole mountains rose and eroded away while they still walked the earth. For more than 1 million years they endured with quiet grace, but even the longest days must one day turn toward evening. Change was coming, slow, patient, inevitable, like the fading of the sun across the plains they once ruled. The earth itself began to shift again. The axis of the planet wobbled in its ancient rhythm. Ice crept down from the north. Rain patterns drifted. What had once been lush grassland turned to dry scrub. Rivers that had always flowed began to vanish into cracked earth. It was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a long whisper of change, a tightening of the world's breath. Seasons stretched into years of drought. Food grew harder to find. The vast herds moved elsewhere, and with them the hunters who depended on their passing. Homo erectus had faced such changes before. They had seen fire fall from the sky, had endured storms, floods, and hunger. But this time something was different. The world was cooling, and the pattern of life itself was bending toward a new chapter. In Africa, where they had once thrived, the air grew cooler and drier. Forests retreated. The open plains grew harsher. Those who survived were those who could adapt, who could move farther, think deeper, endure longer. But in that same crucible of change, something new was stirring. A new kind of mind was beginning to awaken. Some of their descendants, perhaps isolated in green refugees, where rivers still ran, began to change again. Their brains grew larger still, their tools more refined, their gestures more deliberate. They began to dream differently, to imagine in new ways. These were not yet us, but they were closer. From Homo erectus, over ages of quiet transformation, would emerge Homo heidelbergensis, then Neanderthal, then sapiens, each a new expression of the same enduring flame, reshaped by time, by hunger, by thought. The lineage of Homo erectus did not end, it evolved. Yet for those who still lived as they had for ages on the plains of Africa, the islands of Asia life continued, much as before. The same stone tools, the same fires at dusk, the same steady footsteps through the tall grass. They did not know they were fading. No creature ever does. In Java and China, small populations remained isolated, cut off from the slow unfolding of newer minds. They endured in pockets of warmth, while the northern world grew colder. For thousands of years, they lived on their lives unchanged, as glaciers carved the continents anew. In time, their kind became a memory written only in stone. Yet before they disappeared completely, their story met its turning. Across the land, there were signs, new shapes of tools, more intricate, more planned. The fires burned longer, the shelters more secure. The minds that once looked only to the horizon began to look inward, to imagine, to create. The world that Homo erectus had made possible was now moving beyond them. It is tempting to see this as an ending, but endings in nature are never truly endings. They are transformations. Every disappearance leaves a trace, every silence a seed. And so, as the ice advanced and the winds grew sharp, Homo erectus began to yield the earth to their children. They did not vanish in despair nor in defeat. They simply drifted into time as gently as they had once walked into the morning light. Those who remained in Asia adapted in their own way. Some may have grown smaller, their bodies suited to island life, perhaps becoming the mysterious Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Indonesia. Others may have mingled with rising species, their legacy spreading invisibly into the blood of future humans. What remains clear is this: they had done what no other species had done before. They had carried the flame of human life across continents and through 2 million years of change. They had proven that to survive was not to conquer, but to endure. And yet, even as their story waned, the earth they had walked upon remembered them. Their tools, buried in red earth, slept beneath layers of time. Their bones hardened to stone, holding within them the echo of muscles and thoughts long gone. Their footprints, pressed into volcanic ash, remained like signatures, small proofs of lives lived beneath ancient skies. To look at those prints today is to glimpse not extinction, but continuity. Each step pressed into the ground by Homo erectus is a step we still take, the same forward motion, the same curiosity, the same quiet strength. Their ending was not a tragedy. It was a surrender to the flow of time, a passing of the torch. Every species that followed Homo heidelbergensis Neanderthal, Denisovan sapiens, owes its existence to their resilience. They were the spine of humanity's long story. Without their patience, their endurance, their fire, we would never have come to be. Imagine for a moment the last of them, a small band on a quiet island, the sun rising over a calm sea, the morning wind carrying the scent of salt and rain. They wake, tend their fire, sharpen their stones, move through the forest with the same careful grace that their ancestors did 1,000,000 years before. They know nothing of extinction or legacy. They simply live as they always have in rhythm with the earth. And perhaps as night falls, they sit by the fire and look out across the water. The sky above them is scattered with stars, just as it is now for us. The waves murmur softly against the shore. In that stillness, in that ancient peace, they belong utterly to the world that made them. The wind moves through the grass, carrying their scent, their warmth, their story, scattering it across time. And though their bodies will one day turn to dust, their spirit, the spirit of endurance, will remain carried forward by all who follow. For the turning point of Homo erectus was not their fall, but their gift. The gift of survival, of adaptation, of persistence against the endless changes of the world. They showed that intelligence is not only the spark of invention, but the patience to endure. That greatness lies not in dominance, but in harmony. That the measure of a species is not how loudly it roars, but how long it listens. And so the long twilight of Homo erectus was not a tragedy, it was a passage. They became the soil from which we grew the deep roots beneath the tree of humanity. When the last of them finally laid down to rest beneath a sky unbroken by city light, beneath stars burning with silent fire, the earth turned softly and life continued. Their breath became ours. Their endurance became our inheritance. The wind moved across the plains as it always had, whispering through the grass, through the bones, through the long quiet of the ages. It did not mourn, it remembered. And in that memory, Homo erectus lives on not as a relic, but as the beginning of everything that would follow. Dawn, the earth turned as it always has. The seasons passed in their ancient rhythm, wind and rain, ice and thaw, dusk and dawn, each cycle folding into the next like waves over a timeless shore. The world that Homo erectus had known began to change beyond recognition. Where their fires once glowed beneath the acacia trees, new beings walked their children in thought and form, carrying forward the same patient fire. From their long endurance, new minds had risen. Homo heidelbergensis, broad-shouldered and strong, inherited their tools and their courage. Later, Neanderthals and Denisovans emerged in the north, carving out lives in the cold edges of the world. And finally, beneath the same ancient sky came Homo sapiens, the ones who would one day call themselves human. Each of these carried a spark of erectus within them, the fire that does not die, only transforms. It was Homo erectus who first stood tall upon the earth. It was they who first tamed the flame, who first saw the horizon as invitation rather than boundary. Every act of discovery that followed, every voyage, every word, every dream, began with their steps. And so their story did not end. It changed its voice. Their bones became part of the soil that nurtured the next. Their tools, left half buried in red dust, became the lessons of those who came after. Their memory lived not in monuments, but in the shape of the human hand, still curved for grasping, still suited for creation. In that way, they achieved what few species ever have, continuity beyond death. Not as fossils, but as living echoes. Every heartbeat that moves forward in time is a continuation of their rhythm. Every breath we take carries the air they once breathed beneath the same stars. The planet that once belonged to them moved on, reshaped by glaciers and forests and the restless tides of evolution. But the world remembers. Every river that flows through Africa once mirrored their reflection. Every gust of wind that crosses the plains carries the same dust that touched their feet. We are the inheritors of their silence, the long patience that carried them through 2 million years of change. We rush now, we build, we speak in endless noise, yet somewhere deep within their calm endures. The instinct to endure, to adapt, to look toward the horizon, it is their gift to us. Sometimes if you stand still enough, you can almost feel it, that ancient pulse beneath the skin, the whisper of their presence, folded into your own. It is the feeling that life has been here before, that you are not separate from the past, but the continuation of it. In this way, the story of Homo erectus becomes not a tale of extinction, but of transformation. Like the tide that withdraws only to return, their presence was never truly lost. They became the foundation upon which all that followed was built. They taught the earth the art of endurance. They showed that to survive is not to dominate, but to move in harmony with change. That wisdom, too, lingers waiting in the quiet spaces of our modern lives, whispering to those who still listen. When Homo sapiens finally appeared, younger, more curious, more restless, the old world was ready for them. The trails had already been carved by other feet. The fires already burned their secret known. The hands that made the first axes had already taught the earth the touch of will. And so humanity inherited more than a body, it inherited memory. Even if that memory has no words, no stories spoken aloud, it lives in gesture, in intuition, in the unspoken pull toward the horizon. When we gaze at distant lands and wonder what lies beyond, we are reliving the dreams of Homo erectus. When we gather around a fire drawn by its glow and warmth, we are remembering the nights they once shared beneath ancient skies. They were not perfect. They made no art, no music, no monuments, but they endured. And in that endurance, they laid the foundation for every beauty that would one day follow. Their resolution was quiet, a long fading, rather than a fall. No single day marked their end. No final breath closed their chapter. They simply became one with time, absorbed into the great turning of the world. But even as their kind disappeared from the earth, their story was written not in words, but in the continuation of life itself. A story that says, to last is to adapt. To change is to live. In every age since humanity has sought to understand itself, to ask where we come from, why we are here, what it means to endure. And when we trace that question far enough back, we find Homo erectus standing quietly at the threshold of knowing. They looked at the same sun we see now. They felt the same wind. They dreamed, perhaps without words, of the same vast world stretching beyond sight. Their story reminds us that evolution is not a race, but a rhythm. Each species a verse in the song of life, rising, fading, echoing, onward. And Homo erectus sang the longest verse of all. So as the ages turned and they slipped into the quiet folds of history, the world they left behind was forever changed. In the soil, their bones slept. In the air, their breath lingered. In the hearts of all who came after their endurance became a quiet strength that would never fade. They were, and remain, the great survivors, the patient ones, the walkers of continents, the keepers of the first flame. Through them, the long silence of the earth began to speak. Through them, the human story found its beginning. And in that beginning, there was no triumph, no sorrow, only balance. The endless rhythm of life meeting the endless rhythm of time. Endless rhythm and time, the night has returned, soft and endless. The air cools, the world hushes, and time itself seems to slow its breathing. The story of Homo erectus drifts now into stillness, not an ending, but a settling. like embers after fire, like footprints filling slowly with dust, like a memory returning to the quiet where it was born. They are gone, yes, but not lost. Their spirit moves still through the veins of the earth, through the pulse beneath our skin. Their endurance became ours. Their long silence became our voice. Close your eyes and imagine the world they once knew. The air heavy with the scent of rain, the grass whispering beneath the wind, the horizon glowing red as the sun sinks low. They stand there still in that eternal dusk, the first among us. Their shadows stretch across the land, touching rivers and stones that have outlived memory. Their faces are lit by firelight, soft and gold, their eyes reflecting stars that shine in the same sky above you now. For 2 million years, they watched the world turn. They watched the birth of ice and the retreat of oceans, the rise of mountains and the fall of forests. They lived through changes vast enough to humble eternity itself, and through it all they endured. And now, as the rhythm of your breath slows, you can almost feel their patience settling over you. The same quiet resilience that carried them across continents now hums gently within your chest. You're in every way that matters their continuation. You carry their endurance in your blood, their stillness in your bones, their light in the quiet fire behind your thoughts. Listen, and you can almost hear it, the slow exhale of wind through grass, the distant call of night creatures waking beneath a pale moon, the sound of the earth itself breathing the same ancient breath that once filled their lungs. All around them the night had no boundaries, no city glow, no walls, no clock, only the soft unfolding of time, endless, circular, alive. They must have watched the stars as you do now, feeling their quiet comfort. Perhaps they did not understand the patterns above them, but they felt their pull a reminder that even in the vastness of darkness there is order and beauty and peace. Each spark of fire mirrored a star. Each heartbeat mirrored the slow rhythm of the earth. And in that symmetry something timeless was born. Humanity began not in conquest, but in calm, in the stillness of minds learning to see in the quiet rhythm of steps across the land, in the warmth of shared breath beside a flame. Theirs was a wisdom without words, the wisdom of endurance, the understanding that life in all its forms belongs to time and time belongs to life. Now let your own thoughts soften. Let them stretch outward across that same ancient landscape. The plains shimmer beneath moonlight. The rivers gleam like threads of silver. The night wind carries the scent of distant rain. You walk there barefoot and unhurried. The earth beneath you is cool and alive. The stars above you turn slowly, endlessly. You're part of everything, not apart from it. There is no past, no future here. Only the deep present, wide and gentle, holding you like the cradle once held them. Imagine finding their footprints, shallow impressions, hardened in stone. You kneel beside them. Your hand fits within the print perfectly. Across 2 million years, your fingers rest where theirs once pressed into the earth. And for a moment, time dissolves. You are no longer separate. You are walking beside them through grass and shadow, through sun and silence. Your breath mingles with theirs, your heart beats in rhythm with theirs. In this stillness, all distance disappears. They do not speak, but you understand. Their lesson is simple: to endure is to belong, to move gently through the world, to change when the earth changes, to rest when night falls, to live and to let life continue. Their fires fade, but yours remains. It glows quietly within you, the same flame passed from hand to hand, from age to age. Every human life since has carried it forward. Every dream, every act of love, every whispered word beneath the stars, all of it born from that first light. Now, as you drift deeper into rest, let that light soften. Let it settle into the calm of your breath. The world outside begins to blur, and what remains is the ancient music of existence, slow, warm, eternal. The wind hums low over the savannah. The stars shimmer like distant embers. The earth turns slow and steady as it always has. And somewhere in the endless fabric of time, Homo erectus still walks neither past nor gone, but forever moving through the golden light of dawn. They walk beside rivers, through forests, now vanished. They rest beneath trees that no longer stand. They look upon mountains that have changed their faces 1,000 times. And yet the feeling remains the same, the simple knowing that life is vast and beautiful and worth enduring. As the centuries dissolve, they fade softly into the dream of time, leaving only stillness behind. The kind of stillness that soothes the mind, that invites sleep, not as escape, but as return, to the ancient calm that once filled the world before thought. Now breathe slowly, deeply. Let your breath become the wind that moved across their world. Let it carry you through the long corridors of time, through silence and memory and light. You are not separate from history. You are part of its pulse. Every inhale is the echo of a life that came before. Every exhale, a continuation of all that will follow. The earth beneath you turns quietly patient as ever. Above, the same stars shine untouched by distance, unmoved by years. And between them, in the vast quiet, the story of endurance continues, soft, infinite, alive. So rest now. Let the long journey of Homo erectus cradle you into sleep. Let the ancient world unfold behind your eyelids, warm firelight, soft wind, endless night. You are safe here in the arms of time. You are the continuation of every step that came before. The same heart, the same breath, the same quiet miracle of being. And now, as your thoughts drift like dust across the ancient plain, as your body grows still and your breathing deepens, the story fades into silence, not an ending, but a return. Back to the earth, back to the beginning, back to the timeless calm from which all things come. The stars above you are the same that watched over them. The wind that touches your skin once moved across their world. The fire within you is theirs, carried forward through endless generations of light. And now, as you sink gently into sleep, the past and present fold together. One breath, one rhythm, one unbroken story. The story of endurance, the story of becoming, the story of us. And in the soft quiet that follows, the earth continues to turn. The stars continue to shine, and time, ancient and eternal, holds you as it once held them.